Hey there, and welcome to Authentically ADHD. I'm your host, Carmen, and I am so glad that you're here. This is a podcast where we get real about ADHD. No filters, no judgment, a safe space to explore and learn and grow. If you're here, it's because you want to take a deep dive into the world of ADHD, and trust me, we're going to have a lot of fun doing it. Now, you're probably wondering, why did I start this podcast? Well, in true ADHD fashion, it all started very impulsively. One day, I thought, I should start a podcast, especially with all this paperwork that I have and all these notes that I have trying to understand my own ADHD. And the next thing I knew, here I am, sharing thoughts with you. I don't know, 200, 100 episodes later? I don't know. I lose track of time. I'm time blind. Are you? Anyways, when you have ADHD, ideas come fast, and sometimes you just gotta roll with them. Honestly, this podcast was born out of my passion for understanding ADHD in a deeper way with the newest research. You see, pills don't teach skills. That's something I've learned over the years. Medication can help, and it's a great tool to use, but true growth, that comes from knowledge, understanding, and actionable skills. And so that's what I want to share with you. Research-backed insights, practical tips, and lived experiences of someone who's been there. Now, a little bit about me. I'm not just a host of this podcast. I'm also an early childhood special education teacher, which means I've spent years understanding how children learn, grow, and thrive in ways that work for them, especially when they're neurodiverse. And I'm also a certified life and performance coach, guiding people to unlock their full potential in both their personal and professional lives. But here's the thing that makes me a little different. I'm also a late diagnosed ADHDer. And on top of that, I self-identify as being on the autism spectrum. So when I talk about ADHD, it's not just from a professional perspective, it's from lived experience, because I get it. I know what it's like to feel like your brain is running at full speed while everyone else is moving at a different pace, and you have instructions that are in Japanese and upside down, and everybody else got them in their own language. Throughout this podcast, I'll share all kinds of insights about navigating life with ADHD, from the everyday struggles to the strengths that we can celebrate. We'll talk about everything from time management to relationships to self-advocacy, and all about how to live authentically in a world that often asks us to be anything but. Whether you have ADHD yourself or you want to understand it better, you are in the right place. So, let's get started. Hey there, my friend, and welcome back to another episode of Authentically ADHD with me, Carmen. That's me, and today we are going to do a two-parter. We're starting a two-parter, so this is part one of a deep dive on mental health. I don't know what you would call it, a toxic mental health trait that has been buzzing around social media. And so we're going to dive into what is toxic positivity. We're going to explore what it is, why it happens, why it's harmful, and how we can deal with it. We are also going to look at the neuroscience behind the emotional suppression and how this specifically relates to ADHD and ADHD brains and emotional regulation. It's going to be a comprehensive discussion. The more research I did, I realized I was going to have to make it two parts. So the first part is going to be a lot of education. Then next week's episode will be full of tips and strategies, whether you are the one stuck in toxic positivity or you are dealing with somebody who is using a lot of toxic positivity. There's going to be an episode next week chock full of tips and strategies. So let's get comfy because we're about to get real and talk about the not so great side of relentless positivity. So, what is the problem with good vibes only? Have you ever been told to look on the bright side when you were really, really struggling? Or maybe you've seen those Instagram posts captioned good vibes only with a bunch of smiling people. While positive thinking can certainly be powerful and it's in no way bad usually, there's a point where positivity can be too much of a good thing. Enter stage right toxic positivity. This term has gained a lot of traction in recent years. In fact, searches for toxic positivity started rising around 2019. And by 2022, a whole book was published about it by a therapist named Whitney Goodman, titled Toxic Positivity, Keeping It Real in a World Obsessed with Being Happy. The concept hit mainstream awareness, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, when the blanket advice to everybody was to just stay positive. And it felt pretty tone deaf to people experiencing loss and fear and sickness, etc. So let's talk about what is toxic positivity exactly. In simple terms, it's literally the pressure to maintain a positive outlook on everything, no matter what. To point that it minimizes or denies any trace of negative feelings. It's like an emotional rule that says happiness is the only acceptable state. And if you're feeling sad, angry, or afraid, push it down and slap on a smile. You could probably already sense why this might be a problem. We have all encountered examples of this. Think of common phrases that might have come from a well-meaning friend or family member when you're going through something super difficult. Everything happens for a reason. Just stay positive. It could be worse, honestly. Just focus on the good. You should be grateful. You have so much to be thankful for. Don't worry. Just be happy. Good vibes only. On the surface, these comments sound reassuring. The person saying them probably has good intentions, and they might even genuinely believe that they're helping you find a silver lining. But if you've ever been on the receiving end of such a remark while you're in a deep despair of pain, it really feels like a bee sting. That subtle or not so subtle sense that your real feelings were just being brushed aside and invalidated. In fact, one psychologist defines toxic positivity as encouraging statements that are expected to minimize or eliminate painful emotions, creating pressure to be unrealistically optimistic. I'm going to repeat that. Pressure to be unrealistically optimistic without considering the circumstances. It's essentially a form of emotional suppression. Harvard psychologist Dr. Susan David puts it even more bluntly. Toxic positivity sounds good on the surface, but what you're really saying is, my comfort is more important than your reality. Ouch. Did that hurt you? It hurt me. When someone responds to your pain with a good vibes only platitude, it might feel supportive to them, but underneath it sends a very different message. So, hidden messages can be literally anything, but I've seen it described perfectly in little lists online. It often quietly says, your feelings make me uncomfortable, or I don't know how to hold space for this pain, or let's just skip the hard parts of life and spiritually bypass our way through this. These are unspoken implications when someone is pushing relentless positivity at the wrong time. It basically translates to I can't deal with these difficult emotions, yours or maybe even my own. So let's cover it all up with some positive glitter and pretend everything is fine. You know, just like Ross in that episode when everything is fine, he's just fine, but he's really not fine. As you can guess, this approach can be super invalidating. So we're going to unpack why people fall into toxic positivity, that trap. Often, it's unknowingly. They don't know that they're doing it. how it can actually do harm psychologically, physically, and in relationships, and importantly, what the science says about suppressing versus expressing emotions. We'll talk about how the neurodiverse brain might experience all of this a bit differently or more intensely. And in the next episode, like I said, it's going to be chock full of practical tips on handling toxic positivity, whether it's coming from others or from within yourself. So, toxic positivity is sometimes summed up as positive vibes at all costs. It's the overgeneralization of a happy, optimistic state across all situations, where it dismisses genuine human emotions that are not positive. In other words, it's the instance that one should always be positive, even when life is really, really hard, to the point that real feelings get denied or invalidated. I want to be clear here. Positive thinking in itself is never a bad thing. Practicing gratitude, hope, and optimism are very healthy things to do. Research shows that positive mindsets can improve well-being and even physical health outcomes. The problem arises when positivity is forced or false, when it rejects the normal negative emotions that are part of being human, like grieving a loved one, or how you feel during a divorce, or how you feel because you feel really behind in life and you're having just a really hard time and you're just trying to share that experience, but somebody effectively denies the reality of that person's lived experience. By contrast, emotional validation is the healthy opposite, allowing yourself or someone else to feel what they feel and acknowledge those feelings as real and important and valid. Some hallmark examples of toxic positivity include those cliche phrases that we mentioned. Psychologist Nina Vasan gives a few of these. When a friend shares something difficult, a toxically positive response might be everything happens for a reason, or just look on the bright side, or the ever so popular good vibes only slogan, which, let's face it, you see it everywhere, from on t-shirts to Instagram. And on the flip side, a validated response might sound like, that sounds really hard. I'm here for you. Or I'm sorry you're going through this. It makes sense that you'd feel upset. Notice the difference? One brushes the pain aside and the other allows it to be seen. Toxic positivity can come from others, but can also come from ourselves, our own mindset. Might catch yourself thinking, I shouldn't feel angry. I have so much to feel grateful for. I should just be happy. But the internal dialogue might stem from good intentions, like wanting to be grateful, but it can end up shaming you for normal emotions. Self-imposed toxic positivity is when you tell yourself you're not allowed to feel down or anxious because it's not quote-unquote positive. You essentially censor your own emotional truth. So, to recap this area, toxic positivity is pretending to be okay or expecting others to be when they're not, because anything other than okay is perceived as failure. It's plastering a smiley face sticker over a sad face rather than addressing why the sadness is there. It's very different from genuine optimism or resilience, which is still acknowledging the negative, but choosing hope despite that negative. We'll talk later about what healthy positivity looks like, sometimes called realistic optimism, or even Viktor Frankl's term tragic optimism, which means finding the meaning in darker times without denying the darkness. But before all of that, let's explore why toxic positivity happens so much. Why do we or others default to this overly upbeat response? And there are some interesting cultural and psychological reasons. So are you ready for it? Let's go. Why do people fall into this? If it's so unhelpful, why is it everywhere? Well, the truth is, many of us aren't trying to be dismissive or cruel when we are saying, hey, look on the bright side. Often, it's really quite the opposite. We actually think we're helping. And here are some key reasons why people engage in toxic positivity. 1, discomfort with negative emotions or fear of pain. At the core, a lot of toxic positivity comes from avoidance. It acts as a defense mechanism to protect us from things that feel too painful or uncomfortable. Imagine your friend starts crying about a personal loss and you care about them, and seeing their pain makes you feel hurt or anxious and you haven't learned how to sit with that discomfort, you might blurt out, "Hey, don't cry, think of the good times, stay strong." In that moment, it's your discomfort speaking. As Dr. Susan David noted, sometimes we throw out glib positive phrases because we are uncomfortable with the conversation. It's like an emotional reflex. Quick, turn the sad stuff into something happy so I don't have to feel awkward or helpless. In fact, one trauma-informed writer points out that so many people literally don't know how to hold space for someone else's pain, so they just default into trying to fix the feeling or shut it down with positivity. Unfortunately, this often has the opposite effect of what was intended by the person. Then there's number 2, cultural and societal conditioning. We live in a society that often treats happiness as the ultimate goal and stigmatizes vulnerability in many cultures. There are expectations to power through tough times with a smile rather than openly struggling. Think about common sayings. Keep a stiff upper lip. Don't be a downer. No negativity allowed. We get messages from a young age that showing sadness or anxiety is unwelcome and even a sign of weakness. This is amplified by social media where everybody curates a highlight reel of their lives. Whether it's on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, you see endless streams of success, beauty, and quote, hashtag positive vibes, good vibes only, and it creates pressure to appear happy and perfect, even if that's far from reality. Let me give you a little secret here. Nobody on social media has a perfect life. It's a highlight reel of their lives. They all struggle, just like you. But when all your peers are posting smiles and accomplishments, it might make you feel like no one else seems upset. So I guess I shouldn't be either. Thus, people start self-censoring negative emotions publicly and even privately. Additionally, there's the influence of self-help and wellness industry. Ideas and like the law of attraction, you manifest what you focus on, can be misinterpreted to mean never think negative thoughts because you'll invite negative outcomes. In the extreme, this becomes if something bad happened, maybe you just weren't positive enough or you did something wrong. It's a really dangerous form of victim blaming. More on that later. The rise of a certain pop spirituality trends encourages bypassing tough feelings by vibrating higher or choosing positive only. It's not that spiritual or optimistic practices are bad. It's that misusing them to avoid reality, coined by John Wellwood, which is exactly that. Using spiritual ideas or practices to avoid facing unresolved emotional issues. For example, insisting it was a blessing in disguise, or thoughts and prayers immediately after a trauma might shield us from the pain in the short term, but ignoring the issue can make us stress worse in the long run. Wellness culture sometimes perpetuates this by suggesting that you aren't truly healthy unless you rise above all the negativity. The problem, as Very Well Mind notes, is that negative emotions are normal and often signal that something needs to change, and ignoring them means that you might miss important information and delay real solutions. Also, suppressing negative emotions can push you into a really bad depressive episode that could end you up in the mental hospital. Ask me how I know. Number 3, good intentions, a lack of emotional skills. Often, people dish out toxic positivity because they genuinely want to help, but they don't know how. They may believe that cheering someone up is the kindest thing to do, not realizing that it's pretty invalidating. It's like giving somebody a Band-Aid for a really deep cut that actually needs stitches. The intention is care, but the remedy is insufficient and maybe even harmful. Without training in empathy or emotional support, or people who are emotionally immature, many of these people default to positivity as a problem-solving tool. And there's also an element of personal discomfort, as I mentioned. It's tough to witness somebody going through pain, especially if you care about that person. But if you haven't learned to just listen and be present for someone's difficult feelings, you might rush to fix it by saying, hey, just look on the bright side. Number 4, individualism and self-responsibility beliefs. In highly individualistic cultures like the United States, there's a strong narrative that we can control our own destinies and that we should strive for personal happiness, the whole pursuit of happiness thing. It can inadvertently lead to thinking that if you aren't happy, it's a personal failing. One article on spiritual bypassing notes that this individualistic push for constant self-actualization contributes to avoiding negative emotions. Because if you're not happy, maybe you just aren't working hard enough on yourself. People may internalize that they alone are responsible for their mood, so they shove away anything but positivity, which again sets up unrealistic expectations. And number 5, negative phobia and toxic positivity culture. We might call it a negative phobia, a fear that negative feelings are contagious or will sink us if we allow them in. The hashtag good vibes only mantra exemplifies this. It frames normal human sadness or anger as something that will ruin the vibe, to be avoided at all costs. Some workplaces even cultivate this. For example, an unwritten rule might be that you must leave your personal problems at the door. Always be upbeat. Over time, this cultural phobia and negative emotions conditions people to reflexively respond with upbeat platitudes whenever anything heavy comes up. It's kind of like Taylor Swift's lyrics in her song that goes, "Lights, camera, bitch, smile, even when you want to die." Yeah. It's almost like a superstition. If I acknowledge the bad, the more bad will happen. So let's just not acknowledge it. Of course, life doesn't actually work that way. It's an understandable psychological attempt to feel in control. So, to summarize, toxic positivity persists because it feels safer and easier than facing pain head on. It's fueled by discomfort and cultural messaging and avoidance, and even kindness misguided by lack of skill. But now that we know why it happens, and we can look at the consequences. Spoiler, consequences are sweeping pain under the rug. Doesn't make it go away. In fact, it can make things a lot worse. Ask me how I know. In the next section, we're going to talk about how toxic positivity affects our mental health, our relationships, and even our bodies and brains. But first, let's hear a word from our sponsors. Hey there, my ADHD tribe. I have an offer for you. Do you ever feel like you're constantly juggling, but somehow always dropping the ball? You're not alone. We've all been there. I struggle still to manage time, stay organized, and to keep track of the never-ending to-do list. I'm Carmen, and I get it. Trust me, that's why I have created Thriving Authentically with ADHD, Executive Functions and Coping Strategies. It's a course designed to help you take control of your ADHD brain instead of letting it control you. But here's the kicker. It's not just a course. It's a journey. For only $25, you'll get access to about 3 hours of exclusive ADHD-friendly content that breaks down the executive functions in simple terms and explains why your ADHD brain works in the way that it does. And most executive functions, most importantly, it'll teach you practical, research-backed coping strategies that you can start using today. From working memory struggles to time blindness to emotional regulation, we cover it all. Plus, you'll get a workbook in your email packed with interactive exercises to help you reflect on your own ADHD journey, track your progress, and apply what you've learned at your own pace. But that's not all. You also will get 2 personalized coaching sessions where we can dive into your specific challenges and create strategies that work for you. No more one-size-fits-all solutions, just real, authentic, tailored support. And the best part, you get all this for just $25. That's less than a cost of a meal out. Plus, with my proven strategies, you can start improving your executive function skills in no time. Imagine finally understanding your ADHD brain and learning how to thrive and not just survive. Don't wait too long. The spots are limited. Sign up today and let's get started on your journey to thriving authentically with ADHD. Hey there. If you're looking for a game changer in managing your ADHD, let me tell you about something that's made a huge impact on my life. Focused, the adult ADHD group coaching program by Kristen Carter. This isn't just another program. It's a community. It's a roadmap. It's a lifeline for adults with ADHD who want to thrive. Inside of Focus, you'll find weekly coaching calls with Kristen packed with actionable insights, a supportive community of adults who get it. They get what it's like to live with ADHD. You'll get tools and strategies that actually work for our brains. No fluff, just real results. I've been a part of Focused for over a year, and let me tell you, it's where I've learned so much of what I share with you on Authentically ADHD. It's been a game changer for me, and I think it could be for you too. And here's the best part. If you use my link to join, we both save money. It's a win-win. So if you've been looking for the right ADHD support, this is your sign to check it out. Head to the link in my show notes to learn more and sign up. Let's thrive together with tools and support that we need to succeed. Are you also loving what we're doing on Authentically ADHD but want to take your experience to the next level? Well, I have got something for you. Introducing the Authentically ADHD Patreon, your VIP pass to the ultimate ADHD support hub. As a Patreon member, you'll unlock exclusive perks like early access to every single episode, hear it before anyone else does, a treasure trove of resources that I've made, tools, guides, and worksheets to help you thrive in everyday aspects of life, direct coaching opportunities with me designed to help you harness your ADHD powers, and the cherry on top, an incredible community of like-minded individuals who just get it. You're not alone on this journey, and together we can be unstoppable. By joining Patreon, you're not just supporting the podcast, you're fueling a movement. Together, we're breaking stigmas, embracing authenticity, and creating a world where ADHD is seen as a strength and not just a struggle. So what are you waiting for? Head over to patreon.com/authenticallyADHD and join the family today. Let's keep growing, thriving, and showing up authentically together. Hope to see you over there. Back to the show. Now that we've talked about what toxic positivity is and how it shows up, let's talk about how it can harm your mental health and more. When positivity becomes toxic, it's not benign. The phrase toxic positivity itself implies it's poisonous in a sense, meaning that it can be damaging to our well-being. This might sound ironic. How can positivity be harmful? But as we've established, it's not genuine positivity that's the issue. It's the invalidating, suppressive kind, right? So let's break down some of the harms that it can cause. Emotional suppression and stress. One of the biggest impacts of toxic positivity is that it forces people to suppress their real emotions. If you're always being told or telling yourself to put your chin up and think positive, you're never going to get to fully feel or process your negative emotions like sadness, grief, anger, or fear. And what happens when you bottle those up? Research shows that habitual emotional suppression can lead to increased stress, anxiety, and even physical health problems. When you push down emotions, you might temporarily avoid discomfort, but this stress does not disappear. It often goes inward. In fact, studies have found that the effort of suppressing emotions triggers the body's stress response. For instance, one study noted that people who put on a happy face and suppressed negative emotion during stress had higher cardiovascular reactivity. Basically, their blood pressure and heart rate went up more compared to those who expressed some distress. Over time, chronic suppression, always keeping that smile on no matter what, can keep your body in a mild state of fight or flight, so you're constantly in hypervigilance. Elevated stress hormones like cortisol can linger, and there's even evidence linking long-term emotional repression to health issues. One cohort study found that associations between unexpressed hopelessness and higher rates of cancer, and suppressed anger with heart disease. Another study over 12 years suggested people who consistently suppress their emotions may have a higher risk of earlier death from these illnesses. I don't know about you, but to me that's pretty alarming. Bottling up feelings is literally hard on your heart. Ask me how I know. Do it for long enough when you're supposed to be feeling the negative emotions and processing them, and you could end up in the mental hospital or any hospital with physical effects and other effects. So even if the level of physical effect is rare, mentally the stress will accumulate. Suppressed emotion Suppressed emotions often resurface later, and sometimes in explosive ways. You might find that you become more irritable or numb. Psychology experts often say what we resist persists. So by denying pain, you're actually giving it more power in the shadows. It's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. You can do it for a couple seconds, but eventually it's going to pop up. Maybe you knock you in the face on its way out, and in the meantime, you're expending energy to keep it down. Then there's the shame and the guilt involved. Toxic positivity has a way of introducing a shame into emotional equation. If everyone expects you to be positive and grateful all the time, you start feeling guilty or defective. You start feeling guilty or defective for having perfectly normal feelings of sadness, anger, and grief. I have a good life. I should be happy. What's wrong with me? That inner critic voice gets louder. Trauma-informed therapists note that this is especially harmful for people who are already struggling with self-worth. One author described it as positivity becomes toxic because shame isn't a sustainable motivator, and minimizing our true emotions is never an authentic place to heal. In survivors of trauma or folks with mental health challenges, constantly being told to be positive can trigger deep shame because they're unable to simply just flip a switch on their pain. They may conclude that if I can't just choose happiness, I must be broken or unworthy of love. This toxic narrative can be really undermining to self-esteem and add another layer of suffering. So now you're feeling bad about feeling bad, and then you're feeling bad about it. Receiving toxic positivity from others can also cause guilt. Imagine you confide in your friend that you're depressed and they respond, but you have so much to be thankful for, or others have it way worse. You should be grateful. Now, not only are you depressed, but you feel guilty for feeling depressed because apparently that's not allowed because other people have it worse. You might think they're right. I shouldn't feel this way. I'm such a terrible, ungrateful, rotten person. This spiral of guilt and shame pushes you further down. And, unironically, not into happiness, obviously. This toxic positivity mindset can also prevent healing and growth. Paradoxically, the instance on positive vibes can stunt personal growth and resilience. Why? Because negative emotions serve an important purpose. They are signals. They tell us that when something is wrong, something needs attention or change. Grief honors what we have loved and lost. And that is something that is important. Anger can tell us when something is unjust. Fear alerts us to danger. Even anxiety can be a signal to prepare or find support. And if we ignore these signals in the name of staying upbeat and happy, we lose the chance to address underlying issues. As one psychology article puts it, ignoring these feelings in the name of positivity can prevent individuals from addressing underlying issues and growing from their experiences. You end up with stagnant, unresolved crap. For example, say you're in a toxic work environment, but you keep telling yourself to just be positive. I'm lucky to have a job. I'm grateful and it'll all be fine. That positivity might actually be keeping you stuck in a bad situation. Acknowledging your stress and unhappiness could have led you to set boundaries or even seek a better job. The toxic positivity does not give you those steps to growth or improvement. This is why experts say the antidote to toxic positivity is not negativity, it's balance and validation. That's what this whole thing is about if you haven't realized it yet. I'm not telling you to not be positive, and I'm not telling you to be negative all the time. I'm letting you know that when you allow the full range of emotions, happy, sad, grief, joy, bittersweet, learn from them, and then you can cultivate resilience and you can learn what realistic optimism is and incorporate what you've learned from those lessons. Another thing that happens is erosion of authentic connections, which is really sad. When someone persistently responds to others with toxic positivity, it can really harm the relationship. If I, as a friend, am always saying, cheer up, don't dwell on it, when you share something painful, eventually you might stop coming to me with your struggles. You'd know that I wouldn't really hear you. This creates emotional distance. Authentic connection requires vulnerability and feeling heard. So if positivity is used as a steamroller over vulnerability, relationships might remain on a surface level. Friendships or family members might feel they have to wear a mask of happiness around the toxically positive person, or else they face judgment. It's a lonely feeling, right? The person spewing positivity, they might also feel distance and not understand why. They might think that they're being a great encourager, but in reality, they're perceived as unsympathetic and kind of out of touch. In short, it's hard to trust someone who never lets pain exist because it means that they might not be there for you when you're really hurting. A mental health piece by Insight Psychology noted that healthy relationships are built on honesty, vulnerability, and understanding. And toxic positivity can create emotional distance by making people feel like they can't express their true emotions without being judged or dismissed. Invalidation and increased emotional distress is another thing that is a powerful concept in psychology. Emotional invalidation, basically being told your feelings are wrong, unjustified, or stupid, is not just unpleasant. It's actually a small t trauma. You know, the one of 1,000 cuts that we die by. It can be traumatic when someone invalidates your feelings. It can actually make the feelings stronger or more complicated because now, not only are you dealing with the original emotion, but you're also dealing with the hurt of being misunderstood and unheard. For instance, being told, oh, stop being so negative when you're anxious might add feelings of anger or loneliness on top of the anxiety. You start doubting yourself. Maybe I am just weak. Maybe nobody gets it. And in the long term, consistent invalidation can contribute to mental health issues. One 2024 article by trauma specialist Zoe Wyatt stated that invalidation of genuine human emotional experiences, which is exactly what toxic positivity is doing, can lead to increased stress, reduced emotional resilience, harm to interpersonal relationships, and even mental health issues like anxiety, depression, or even psychosomatic disorders. In other words, never being allowed to feel sad or scared makes you more chronically stressed and less able to bounce back from difficulties. It can also create somatic symptoms, those mysterious body aches, itchiness, illnesses that actually have emotional roots because the feelings have to go somewhere. On a neurological level, being invalidated and socially rejected registers in the brain much like physical pain. Social neuroscience research has shown that when we experience rejection or ostracism, regions like the anterior cingulate cortex, the brain's alarm for pain, lights up similarly to when we actually feel physical pain. So, emotional invalidation, especially from loved ones, can be experienced as a form of rejection, abandonment of one's true self, and it actually feels like the person is slapping you as well. Not only does it cause emotional pain, but our emotional pain turns into physical pain. It's basically somebody telling you that the real you, the you that feels X emotion, is not acceptable here. That's painful. And if it happens repeatedly, people might either withdraw, feeling isolated, or interestingly, some might even be more outwardly emotional in a bid to be seen. For example, a child who is constantly outward emotional in a bid to be seen, for example, a child who is told, "You're fine, stop crying, come back when you have calmed down," might escalate to a full-blown tantrum because that's the only time that their distress is taken seriously. Neither of these outcomes is healthy. Then there's the impact on specific populations. For example, people who are experiencing grief, trauma, mental health conditions. It's worth noting that toxic positivity can be especially damaging in certain contexts. I want you to listen closely here, because this is where I see a lot of toxic positivity happening, and it shouldn't be happening here, especially in these contexts. I'm going to repeat it again. It impacts specific populations, people experiencing grief, trauma, or people who have diagnosed mental health conditions. It's especially damaging. Toxic positivity is damaging in these contexts. During grief, for example, people often hear things like, "They're in a better place now. Be happy for the times they were here. Don't be sad." But grief experts warn that this short-circuits the necessary grieving process. It can complicate grief, making it last longer or turn into depression because the person feels that they must hide their sorrow. In cases of trauma or chronic illness, toxic positivity can feel like blame. Telling someone in depression to just think happy thoughts is like telling someone with a broken leg to just walk it off. It's just like telling me, a person with ADHD, to pay attention better. That's like telling somebody who needs glasses just to see better. As the Very Well Mind article on spiritual bypassing noted, telling people that you should just stop being negative to avoid anxiety or depression basically implies that it's their fault that they're suffering because they're too negative. And this is tremendously invalidating and can worsen conditions like anxiety, CPTSD, ADHD, autism, and other neurodevelopmental delays or disorders, which often feed on the self-blame that we already have. Then there's the skipping the hard part syndrome. Oh God, this one really grinds my gears. Finally, remembering that bullet about skipping the hard parts of life and spiritually bypassing through. When we habitually skip the hard parts, we actually do rob ourselves of meaning and depth. Life's challenges, as awful as they may be, are often where we gain insight, strength, and empathy. And if someone tries to fast forward through every painful chapter with these platitudes, they may never develop true resilience. It's like trying to read a novel by only skimming the happy chapters. You miss half of the story and the lessons that come along with it. Psychologist Paul Wong, a proponent of a more balanced, positive psychology 2.0, talks about the concept of tragic optimism, finding hope and meaning through suffering. It's turning suffering into strength or pain into power by not denying it. It's the opposite of toxic positivity. Tragic optimism is a term originally from Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor who certainly knew suffering, but it's about acknowledging the tragedy and still saying, yes, there can be purpose or growth from this. Notice that it doesn't say tragedy is great or pretending this isn't a tragedy or pretending that it's positive. It's actually a positive, but in a very grounded way. Toxic positivity, in contrast, is like trying to slap a smiley face sticker on tragedy and pretend it's not there. like what our current administration is kind of trying to do. Anyway, it doesn't truly alleviate the pain, it avoids it, thus prolonging it. So clearly, toxic positivity does more harm than good. It increases stress, shame, isolation, and can stunt true emotional growth and healing. Now we're going to pivot a little bit and talk about how this topic intersects with ADHD in the brain. Since my podcast focuses on ADHD authenticity, you might be wondering, does being ADHD make someone more vulnerable to toxic positivity or its effects? Or what does neuroscience say about how our brains handle emotional suppression versus expression? Let's dive into that. So, for those of us with ADHD, emotions can sometimes feel like a roller coaster with faulty brakes. It often involves challenges with our emotional dysregulation, that executive function issue. It's a core aspect of adult ADHD, and it means that we have experienced feelings more intensely and have a harder time steering them or putting them on brakes once they intentionally get going really, good. So, what happens when someone tells an emotionally intense ADHD brain to just be positive, essentially to shut down those big feelings? It can be particularly problematic. Research suggests that people with ADHD are more prone to using less adaptive emotional regulation strategies. One systematic review found that compared to non-ADHD controls, adults with ADHD tend to rely more on emotional suppression rather than cognitive reappraisal. Quick explanation. Reappraisal means reframing the situation in a different light to change how you feel. It's generally considered a healthier strategy. Whereas suppression, it means that you're just pushing the feeling down and not showing it. So an ADHD person on the surface might appear to shut down or stonewall in a difficult moment, not because they don't feel it, but because maybe they feel it too much. And the suppression is the unfortunate strategy they have learned to cope. If society or upbringing has invalidated their emotional expressions, and many ADHD kids sadly get lost in a negative maze of feedback for their outbursts, sensitivity, and how they're too much, not enough, etc., etc. And they may have internalized a habit of bottling it up to avoid further criticism. Essentially, an ADHD brain often goes, these emotions are just too overwhelming, and I haven't been taught how to manage them, so I'm just going to jam the lid on and pretend I'm fine. This is a fertile ground for toxic positivity to take root internally. Now, importantly, the same review notes that because ADHD individuals are often suppressed rather than reappraised, they could benefit greatly from learning more adaptive strategies like reappraisal. That's a hopeful point. It means emotional regulation skills can improve with practice. And we are going to jump in and have a whole episode on tips next week. But it also highlights that telling somebody with ADHD to just think positive is unlikely to magically fix their emotional overwhelm. In fact, it might backfire by adding pressure without giving them any tools. Then there's the emotional hyperreactivity that we have in ADHD. Neuroscience findings showing that ADHD brains may react more strongly to emotional stimuli. For example, in one study, adults with ADHD showed greater amplitude for certain brain waves, LLP, etc., in frontal regions in the response to emotional stimuli, suggesting more cognitive effort was required to regulate their emotions. The dorsal and ventral anterior cingulate cortex, parts of the brain that are involved in managing emotions and conflict, were highly activated in ADHD participants when just viewing negative images, even without explicit instructions to regulate. This implies that at baseline, an ADHD brain might be working overtime when faced with something upsetting. It supports the idea of emotional hyperreactivity. Feelings might hit harder or take longer to settle. In practical terms, if an ADHD person is really upset or anxious and someone responds with "it's fine, don't worry, be happy," it can feel like nails on a chalkboard and in your ears. Literally, the nails in your ears and on the chalkboard. The emotions are revved up, and now they're being told to instantly downshift to neutral without a clutch. Cue the metaphorical gears grinding. Then there's that rejection sensitivity. Many people with ADHD often experience something called rejection sensitivity, which essentially means that extreme emotional pain, perceived rejection, or criticism. And while it's not an official DSM diagnosis, it's commonly reported and linked to ADHD by experts. And this can feel a lot like you're just... Okay, let me start over. It's the theory is that the difference in ADHD brains, the structure and chemistry, make it harder to regulate emotional responses to rejection. So it kind of hits us like a truck instead of a pebble. So imagine this scenario. You share a vulnerable feeling or struggle, and someone responds with toxic positivity, which as we have established, it's a form of invalidation. That can even feel like rejection, a rejection of your emotional reality. For a person who is neurodivergent, with rejection sensitivity that your feelings don't matter, subtext of toxic positivity can literally be crushing. It may trigger an outsized reaction, intense hurt, anger, deep shame, or the person might just shut down. Some might withdraw and think, I'm not opening up to this person again, while others might lash out. You just don't get it. Neither is a great outcome for the relationship or the individual's well-being. In a way, kids and adults with ADHD are especially in need of validation, not because their feelings are more important than anyone else's, but because they often feel things so strongly and have a history of being misunderstood. Unfortunately, they are also more likely to hear invalidating comments. Anecdotally, many ADHD folks recall being told phrases like, calm down, stop overreacting, you're being too dramatic, stop being so negative, through their entire lives. These are classic invalidations. In childhood, this kind of environment can teach an ADHD kid that their natural emotional responses are wrong or too much. Then they may adopt the people-pleasing stance and try to be extra cheerful to avoid any hint of bad. Emotions that upset others, which is a form of masking, which is very damaging. I have several episodes on it. There's an online quote in ADHD communities that says, kids with ADHD are especially sensitive to invalidation without realizing it. We sometimes gaslight our kids by dismissing their feelings. I'm going to say that again, and it's probably going to be quoted on my Instagram page, but kids with ADHD are especially sensitive to invalidation without realizing it. We sometimes gaslight our kids by dismissing their feelings, which is a call to all caregivers to validate more. It rings true. Invalidation is essentially gaslighting, making somebody doubt their reality. And ADHD kids get a lot of it if parents or teachers are not trauma-informed or neurodiversity affirming. Then we will fall into the absolutely dreaded but terrible ADHD shame spiral. Many of us with ADHD carry a load of shame from years of feeling like we don't meet expectations in school, in relationships, at work, etc., etc. They often develop negative self-talk, and if you add cultural pressure of that toxic positivity, an ADHDer might constantly berate themselves for not being happy enough or grateful enough on top of everything. For instance, say an ADHDer has a day where they just struggled at work and feel depressed, and they also have that internal voice that's saying, ugh, why can't you just get it together? Look at so-and-so. They're happy. They're fine. Why can't you just be positive like them? This internal toxic positivity attempt is just deepening the shame when it inevitably fails to instantly cheer us up, as one clinician puts it, when we bypass blunt or numb the negative emotions, the energy of those emotions can't be released. So when people are invalidating our negative emotions, it can lead to basically us believing that our emotions are wrong and that we are wrong or broken. And since you can't turn off emotions by willpower, an ADHDer might feel even more defective for failing to do so. So reinforcing a vicious cycle of shame. Neuroscience of suppression versus acceptance. we're going to talk a little bit about why this happens in the brain with emotional suppression, which toxic positivity encourages, versus acceptance or healthy processing. Neuroscientists have used fMRI scans to see the effects of different emotional regulation strategies. When people suppress their emotions, say when a sad film comes on but they're trying not to show any sadness, studies show a couple things. Sometimes the amygdala, the brain's emotional alarm center, remains quite active, meaning the brain is still in distress even if your face looks calm. And often there's increased activation in parts of the brain that regulate effort, like the prefrontal cortex, because suppression is work and it's hard. Masking is bad. Okay, that just flew out of my mouth. Masking is not always bad, but masking is harmful, and it's not healthy to do all the time, right? It's like pressing an emotional brake with one foot while the other foot is still on the gas of the emotion. In contrast, when people practice acceptance or mindful acknowledgement of emotions, the brain responds differently. One fascinating study shows that simply practicing mindful attention to one's breath, a basic mindfulness technique during upsetting stimuli, actually decreased activation in the amygdala and increased connectivity between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. In plain English, staying present and accepting the moment calmed the brain's fear and emotion center and helped the thinking brain regulate the feeling. Another study has shown that regular mindfulness and meditation can even lead to the amygdala physically shrinking in size, while the connections to the frontal lobe, our rational planning area, are strengthened. This means less emotional reactivity and better top-down control when stresses arise. So why am I even bringing this up? Well, because mindfulness and emotional acceptance are essentially the polar opposite of toxic positivity. Mindfulness says, feel what you feel, without judgment. Let it come and let it go. Toxic positivity says, feel only positive or don't show anything at all. Skip the rest. The brain science sides with acceptance, acknowledging a difficult emotion, naming it, talking about it, tends to help integrate and calm the rational and emotional response. In fact, Dr. Jill Bolt Taylor famously describes the 90-second rule. When an emotion is triggered, the physiological reaction, the flush of biochemicals, it lasts about 90 seconds in our thoughts or resistance. So if we allow ourselves to feel fully, even when a hard wave of emotion happens, it will usually crest and subside neutral in a short period of time, which prolongs our anguish, is often either ruminating on it or trying to resist or push it down. Which ironically, it will keep it brewing. Toxic positivity is resistance. It's saying, nope, not going to feel that. And it can trap emotion under pressure rather than letting it run its course. Now, from an ADHD perspective, learning mindfulness acceptance can be a game changer, since ADHD folks are more often to run into hot emotional situations. In fact, preliminary studies show and suggest that mindful training is effective for improving emotional regulation in ADHD populations. It likely works by strengthening those attention and inhibition mechanisms in the brain. That little bit of underactive or irregular in ADHD. Over time, mindfulness can help ADHDers pause before reacting and be more aware of their emotional state without immediately suppressing or exploding. So, let's bring it all together. If you have ADHD, toxic positivity can hit you like a double whammy. If you already might feel emotions intensely, and then you're being told, externally or internally, that those emotions are unacceptable and not valid. This can exacerbate those feelings of rejection, shame, and dysregulation. But the hopeful message is understanding this dynamic means we can consciously choose a different approach, one of self-compassion, and true emotional processing. Instead of saying good vibes only, maybe a new slogan for us ADHDers, and honestly for everyone, should be all vibes are welcome. We just learn how to ride them. We want authentic emotional agility, the ability to experience the full range of emotions and navigate them, rather than a false and rigid positivity. So, we covered a lot of heavy stuff in this episode, which is why I've broken it down into two different halves, because it's such a big, huge topic. It's heavy, and we talked about what it is, toxic positivity, and why it's so harmful. So next week, we're going to deep dive into solutions and strategies, how we can help ourselves if we have a tendency to invalidate our own or others' feelings with toxic positivity, and or how we can respond to protect ourselves when someone else fires toxic positivity missiles at us. That's all I have for now, my friend. Stay authentic, and I cannot wait to deep dive into these tips with you next week. We will talk super soon.